Hey, everybody. I want to talk today about the election process for you, the voter. This is one of the most important things that uh, we want you to get out of this class. Is we want you to be a regular voter, an educated voter, and a confident voter. And this is kind of just an introduction to hopefully getting you to those three things. Voting in this country is incredibly important. It's kind of what our country is based on. It's one of the reasons why we declared independence. We felt that, if you've ever heard that saying, no taxation without representation, we were upset that we were being taxed by the British and not being represented in Parliament. So one of the reasons we declared independence is to vote. But even when we became a country, we didn't give voting rights to all people. And throughout history, many people have fought and struggled their entire lives to expand who can vote in this country. And today we're in a much better spot than we were throughout history. But we know as a result of many fights, people have gained their right to vote and are still fighting to make for the ease of voting better. So just for an example, in 1870, Black men got the right to vote. In 1920, women got the right to vote. 1924, Native Americans got the right to vote. 1943, Chinese immigrants got the right. And in 1965, we passed the Voting Rights Act, which is one of the things Martin Luther King Jr. fought so hard for, and many other people along with him, which outlawed things like poll taxes and literacy tests and things like that to vote. And this debate is still going on today about how easy voting should be or how difficult it should be in order to secure our elections and create equality for all people. Voting rates have kind of fluctuated throughout time. You'll see that early on, it took a while for the people to have that kind of build that habit of voting. But by the 1800s, we were pretty high, 70 to 80% in presidential elections, and more in that like 60 to 70% in midterm off-year elections. But over the last 100 years, that's kind of gone back down as people have started to trust the system a little bit less, be disengaged in the political process. But we have a nice little trend as of recently where we've seen the 2020 and 2016 election, the 2020 election be much higher than historically. Wisconsin is one of the highest rated voter turnout states, and that has a lot to do with us being a swing state. People feel like their vote matters a little bit more because we could vote Republican or Democrat for president. But I encourage you to think about these not only as presidential races, but to think about this as local races, school board races, village board, state representative. These are races that are going to impact you probably more on your day-to-day than that presidential race would. So we want you to be educated voters for that as well. And then lastly, here's how we compare to other countries. We have this great right, but overall throughout our elections, we only average 55.7% voter turnout rate. And compared to some of these European countries, that's quite low. So as a country, I think we should challenge ourselves to increase that. When it comes to voting, not only do we want you to vote, but we want you to be an educated voter. And there's going to be a ton of information out there for you when you decide to vote. And it's important to know the difference between what is good information and what is bad information or information that's not as useful. TV commercials, we will all see plenty of TV commercials throughout throughout campaign season. And I would strongly urge you to not pay too much attention to them. They are 30-second to 60-second snippets of just advertisement. They're selling a product, and the product is themselves. They're not trying to teach you anything. They're trying to sell themselves. And you're not going to learn very much from a TV campaign commercial. So I'd recommend, paying attention to them, but not basing any votes on them. Radio is going to be a little bit better, especially for local races. Oftentimes, local radio shows will have candidates on and actually do Q&As with them. There's a lot of national talk radio shows as well. You just got to be aware of bias when you're listening to the radio. There's a lot of partisan news shows out there. Signs, yard signs, are basically worthless in terms of helping you to vote. They're straight up name recognition, so don't spend a lot of time on that. Internet, newspapers, and magazines are all great resources for looking up the most current, up-to-date information about candidates in specific races. But again, look for biases. If you really want to learn about a candidate and what that person believes, I would highly recommend looking at their websites. You're not going to see anything negative about that candidate, but you will see some great information on what they believe and what they want to accomplish. So take a look at those candidate websites. And then lastly, debates. Debates are held for almost every position, no matter how local or national. And debates are a great way to hear what people have to say without having to spend too much time to think about it. And you sometimes get a more honest response in debates. Other than preparing to vote by being educated, you have to prepare to vote by being registered. Registering is different in each state, but basically you have to prove who you are and where you live, because no matter who you are, you only have one place where you are eligible to vote. Your polling location is linked to your permanent address. So for example, I live in Mount Horeb. There are 2 polling locations in Mount Horeb, but there's only one of them that I can vote at that is based on my address. When you register, you have to make sure that you meet certain requirements, that you're of age, that you live in the proper location, and that you have the correct residency and so on. There's a great website for that. It's called My Vote Wisconsin. We'll look at this a little bit more when we get into class. But here you can actually register to vote right online. You can view your ballots. You can find your polling locations. We'll look at more of that in class, but it's a great website, great resource for you. One of the things you have to do is, when you register, is prove you live where you live. And oftentimes, like something like a utility bill is something you'll have to show to prove you live where you live. All right, I just had to change locations quickly, but I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. So yeah, basically to sum up registration, you have to prove who you are, where you live, and that you meet the requirements of voting. I would highly recommend registering in advance using that My Vote Wisconsin website that I gave you. And if you don't do it in advance, when you go to the polling place on voting day, you have to wait in 2 lines, which you do not want to do. Other than registering, once you're registered, you can go to your polling place. Your polling place is almost always some sort of a public building, like a library, a school, could be a post office, a community building, something like that. It's accessible for people so that people of all abilities can get in there and vote. And you'll want to look on like My Vote Wisconsin, for example, for where that is and what their times of operation will be. And as long as you're in line by the time the polling place closes, you'll be able to stay in line and finish voting. So that's important to note as well. When you go in your polling location, you will see a number of different voting booths similar to these. So that's kind of what to expect when you get there. Here's another example of what they might look like. That's where you'll fill out your ballot so you have some privacy. When it comes to voting methods, there's a wide range of different voting methods. Most of them nowadays are paper ballots. Although there are some computer methods, we're using less of that because of possible hacking. There's these old school lever ones where you like pull levers and it chooses who you vote for, or you choose by pulling certain levels who to vote for. But that's not something you're probably going to see around here. Absentee voting, if you want to vote early, or if you want to vote early because you're going to be gone or out of town on voting day, you can request an absentee ballot. They send you one that looks like this in the mail. You fill it out, you send it back, and your vote will be counted. You can also do that if you just don't want to go to the polling place. During COVID, many people started voting absentee so that they could stay away from crowds of people. But here's probably what your ballots are going to look like. Either this one where it's just a fill in the bubble kind of thing, or this one to the right where you got to connect the arrow for the person you want to vote for. For either one of these, just make sure you fill them out properly. Don't have any stray marks, just like on like the ACT, for example. You want to have the ballot be as clean and easy to read as possible. This is a type of ballot called a CHAD. In this one, for who you want to vote for. So, for example, if you wanted to vote for Al Gore, you would find the little dot where it points from Al Gore points to, and then you use a little tool to punch it out. We're probably not going to see those anymore because of an election in 2000, this exact election we're looking at, where there was some issues counting these and what to count, what not to count, based on if they were properly filled out or not. So most likely you're going to see one of these two types of ballots. When you're done filling out your paper ballot, there'll be a machine that looks similar to this. They will fill it. It will count your ballot. It won't count your vote, but it'll count your ballot to make sure that the same amount of ballots that were given out were also brought in. And then you get your I voted sticker. So don't forget to take that after you are done voting as well. When it comes to counting the votes, machines and computers help to count them to get kind of preliminary results, but they are also read by hand, and they have to be read by individuals under law. So you can't just rely only on the computer counts. In some cases, there are recounts if elections are really close. So like Florida in 2000, the presidential election, they were using those hanging chads or those chad votes. It was really close. And as a result, they had to go back, recount every ballot, look to see if they were properly filled out. And in that situation, they might throw ballots away if they can't tell with 100% accuracy who you're voting for. So that's why those stray marks and proper filling out of your ballot are really important. Usually we can find out who won the election within a matter of hours once the polls close, and that's thanks to exit polls. If we had to wait for the actual counting of ballots, that could take days or even weeks, especially in close elections. But because of exit polls, we're able to find out pretty quickly if the election is not close. And exit polls are basically statisticians, pollsters, who wait outside a polling location, ask people questions about who they voted for. And if they get enough statistical data, they can tell, usually, within fairly certain accuracy, who is going to win the election without actually having to count the ballots. That's how on election night we're able to watch TV and know who's winning each state for the presidency, for example. It's all thanks to exit polls. Although recently polls have changed a bit as people's methods of voting and their characteristics around that have changed with how society's changed as well. So we're trying to almost refigure out how to properly poll this new electorate. Lastly, there's a number of kinds of elections you're going to participate in. Most of them are popular vote elections, which is a simple vote. Whoever gets more votes wins. This will be true for senator, representative, state elections like state senate, state assembly, and governor. Also will be true for school board. As we know, if we haven't talked about it yet, we will. That's not the case for the president. Popular vote doesn't necessarily matter for the presidency. It's the Electoral College, and we'll talk about that if we haven't. But it's possible to win the presidency with less votes, like Donald Trump did when he beat Hillary Clinton. He actually had 3 million less votes than her because he won the Electoral College. And lastly, the three other kinds of elections you might see are proposition, referendum, and recall. A proposition is a suggestion to the legislature. So basically, it would be like on the ballot, there being a question, would you support a law that legalized marijuana? And if the people say yes to that, it's like a survey to the legislators where they go, oh, okay, 65% of Wisconsinites would like to legalize marijuana. Maybe we should suggest legalizing it. So it's more of a suggestion. A referendum is where the people actually get to choose. So if we had a marijuana referendum, the legislature would say, people, choose whether you want to legalize marijuana. And if they did in a referendum, it would then become law and marijuana would become legal. The other thing we see referendums used for would be for local issues like police buildings or new schools. Like, for example, we had just passed a $65 million referendum to do the expansion on the high school and some other buildings. And basically, you're asking the people, would you be okay with raising taxes in order to fund this project? And the people get to choose. Lastly, our recall elections. Recall elections are held if there's enough people who sign a petition to try to remove somebody from office. So, for example, in Wisconsin back in the mid 2000s, Governor Scott Walker had a recall election. There's like 1 million people, close to 800,000 people who signed a petition saying that they don't want the governor to be governor anymore. And in the middle of his term, had to essentially have an election and get reelected to finish out his last 2 years. And he ended up becoming the first governor in history to win that. More recently, there was the California governor who also won a recall election. Or historically, there was Governor Gray Davis from California who lost a recall election and was replaced with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor. All right, so those are the different types of elections you might vote in. We'll talk more about all of this, and we'll apply it in a little class activity later this week. Keep those notes safe. We'll see you all in class.